I'm going to talk about some automated identity management using the Ping Admin API. First, let me talk a little bit about the problem space. I was working in a fairly small company, and there we go. We ran into a bunch of problems. We were using Ping IAM systems. We had multiple environments. We had developers getting in, and inevitably they would monkey with things because they're curious, and that's what they do. I'm a developer as well, so that's fine. We had a very small team. Myself and another gentleman were really the core of the team. We had a third person who was our manager who did some work sometimes. So there were three of us supporting about 1,500 people or so, and we were constantly having to go fix things. Configuration and feature management and fixing problems often impacted the other work we were trying to do in the IAM space. And the last thing, the most complicated piece was that the configuration objects in Ping form a dependency tree. So while the API, the admin API is pretty well documented, it tells you nothing about what order you need to make those calls. And we needed a reliable, performant means of creating and managing the configuration in our systems. The solution ended up being automation, and that allowed us to be more reliable, faster to deploy. The number of environments, pretty much irrelevant. And restoration of fouled environments is much easier using an automated solution. So let me talk for a minute about the strategy, approach, and tactics that I employed to make this work. Really difficult keeping this, we had 4 customer-facing environments, dev, QA, UAT, prod. 2, those are external for our customer software use. 2 internal ones for inside the company, prod, which is what we all used inside, and then a staging or UAT environment to try out things and test other people's software that we used internally. But essentially all of those environments is not possible for 3 people to keep in sync. It's just simply not. The admin API in Ping Federate allows almost complete identity management if you work hard enough at it. And the individual calls, as I said, are quite well documented. The initial solution was super simple. It had no data store. That ended up being a bit of a mistake. What the basic strategy was to configure by hand a platform that get everything working the way we want, and then use that as a source and grab the configuration out of it and push it to any number of other environments, typically all of them. So here's some details about this stuff. The automation, I ended up writing an API to wrap an API. The Ping API is very nice, but it's got some complexity to it that makes it hard to deploy in various cases, and especially if I'm going to hand this off to someone else, it was a little much. The solution can be triggered by Jenkins or similar platforms. It's a very simple API, so weaving it into a mobile app or a web app is pretty easy. It's 17 modules. They range from 2 to 5 or 6 operations each. And I wrote it in Python because a lot of people use it in DevOps. I considered using JavaScript. I think in a lot of ways I might have liked that better as a developer, but the idea was to hand it off to DevOps folks, and most of them knew Python, so I ended up using that. It worked out fine, actually. What I used was Flask and Flask RESTful. You can look that up if you want. It's very simple. It's easy to stand up an API endpoint quickly. And this kind of work is easily doable by I wrote all of it, basically, but could have gotten a lot further, a lot faster with a small team, but you definitely wouldn't need a big team. There was no persistence initially, and that ended up being a bit of a problem. The first data store was implemented using in-memory variables. That's an awful way to do things. I ended up using that for a minute because I had to the whole point of this was to keep environments in sync. So I ended up living with it for a minute, but I've started writing a second version of it and playing around with Cassandra and Mongo. So another feature of it is that I'm a REST hacker. I've been writing services for a while. There's just not, I heard Fielding talk about, HATEOAS and all that, and I'd never found a use case that really demanded it. This one actually kind of does. One of the problems is that there's no documentation on the order that you need to make these calls, and if you're going to completely configure a platform from top to bottom, you kind of need to know the order of the calls because you've got to build it up in the order of the dependency trees kind of growth. So another issue that I came across, which is probably will need a little, another thing I'd like to say is this is sort of a work in progress. I did use it to stand up all of our environments, particularly all of our customer-facing environments. But there are some issues there. And in particular, you might need to, what I did is use the same cryptographic keys on all the systems except production. You might want to go a little more fine-grained with that. The functional scope was really initially just the entire configuration. So we'd literally manually configure a platform in Ping Federate and then basically pipe the entire thing to whatever the target platform was. And so I'm essentially using Ping Federate systems as data stores, pulling from one, swishing it around, changing all the environment-specific things like the LDAP store, the database, various other pieces that were environment-specific, and then pushing it to another one. It's actually pretty easy code. You could probably do this yourself without a lot of trouble. Well, it'll take a minute, but it's not difficult to do if you spend a little time with the Admin API. Subsequent pass through this, and I did a little bit of this. I didn't actually. I ended up making it HATEOAS and writing a simple Python client that would just kind of Pac-Man along there and chomp through the sequence of calls. I did it to provision 2FA, federation, updates to OIDC policies, and a variety of other things. And I could certainly, I think one of the things that I'm going to do next is weave other smaller flows to deploy ping ID or to whatever other kind of features on top of an existing system. Yeah, these are all the environments that we're involved in. I ended up creating 3 separate environments as well in AWS because as soon as we stood up our 4 customer-facing and 2 internal-facing environments, we very quickly realized we weren't allowed to touch them anymore because developers were using dev, testers were using QA, ... So we ended up having 9 environments, not 6. But we had 3 environments out in AWS that allow us to experiment. We also had integrated API management, and we needed a place to develop those features. So that ended up being pretty critical. You need a place for the identity people to play with where they're not going to impact other people. Now, this, like I said earlier, it will push an entire system from place to place, but there's some more stuff that I'd like to add to it. And this is based on various interactions with our actual DevOps team. I'm not a DevOps guy. I'm actually an architect, developer, programmer, et cetera. But these are some of the things that we wanted to add. And we did implement some of these in a sort of ad hoc sort of way. And so having probably some kind of database like Mongo or Cassandra for storing JSON objects allow us to stash the entire configuration in dev at a known space in the database. Developers go in and screw it up, click, bam, it's back. Done. No screwing around, don't have to waste any time on it. That's a super useful feature. Provisioning specific configurations for either a new environment or another environment is another thing I'd like to add. I'd also like to wave in SCIM integration. This particular system really is just dealing with Ping Federate. But we had to provision applications onto both Apogee and Ping. We had to provision users into the applications, assign them roles. All of our apps were RBAC based, so that's not a big deal. But SCIM is a standardized way of doing most of that work, which could also be woven into the same tool. And then possibly provisioning new hosts for elastic infrastructure, although Ping has some of those capabilities themselves, so that might not be necessary. And other things, mobile and web interfaces, in particular mobile interfaces for some of our ops people, so that they just had the thing in their pocket, could easily pull it out, do what they need to do, and put it away. And another thing that was pretty interesting is that I did this between a QA environment that got horribly messed up, and I piped it into AWS, figured out what was wrong with it, and then wiped the QA system and piped it back into QA. And that's pretty cool. If that problem had been in prod, that would have been very useful. And it was not bad in QA as well, but not as urgent as you might imagine. Anyway, that's all I have today. Any questions? Go ahead.
So those scripts sound awesome. Are they on GitHub, and do you plan on sharing them publicly?
Huh?
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sure. The question is this on GitHub? And the answer is no. The work that I did belongs to Entertainment Partners. However, I have clean roomed that thing because I ended up bailing out of there and spending a couple months not working. And I now have a new version of it that is, I think, different enough that it could be. However, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it yet. So no, I have not given it away just yet. And it kind of depends. I've got to sort through that. It's only been a couple months. But I want to at least get the new version up to the level that I'm at here, maybe add the database, a couple things like that. But if you want, grab my email address and my phone number, and you can hit me up later, and we can talk. So anyway, any further questions?
Yeah, follow-up. What
Yep.
version of Ping do you use?
This was run against 8.1, 8.2, actually, yeah, 8.0, 1, 2, 3, and 9.0, I believe.
And then I can just keep going. Did you have
Sure.
So deploying it, so the Ping Admin API, I use that a lot.
Yeah, it's awesome, actually. I like it.
When you threw it up into AWS, did you enable things like auto-scaling and things like that?
No, I just started playing with 9, unfortunately, before some cataclysm occurred. And I'm not working there anymore. I'm working somewhere else now. Yeah, I didn't get to, I didn't realize that they were going to do the elastic infrastructure thing with Ping Federate. So I had started to go, oh, well, I could use this for that. But I don't know that I'd bother with that now because I think they're doing it themselves. Anyway.
So again, was it
It's all you.
mostly just EC2 instances and then the engine to be in front of like a load balancer, or was it all EC2?
Actually, the only piece our company didn't want to put, we initially started out putting all our identity stuff inside. We had a hybrid environment. We had apps in AWS, Azure, and on-prem. This is a legacy software company that was literally 35 years old, so some of that legacy was like CI, SAM databases and stuff. None of this stuff touching that, but so the applications were in all those different environments. We had IAM boxes on-prem primarily controlling that, although we started to move some out into AWS as well, so that they're closer to the properties they're protecting, basically.
Oh, all right. So then were you using but that was all in AWS, you said, right?
The development environments are all in AWS. Our applications range from AWS to Azure to on-prem, all three. And we initially had all the identity stuff in-house and just started experimenting with moving it out closer to some of the properties, like out to Azure or out to AWS to protect the apps and APIs that were actually in those spaces.
Yeah, you had Ping in AWS and it would reach back into the data store to actually like do the authentications against the users.
Say it again?
So did you have, maybe I misunderstood, but you had Ping in AWS? And then
Yes.
it would reach back to on-prem for the user lookup?
No. We had essentially 3 machine clusters. This is a pretty small company, not billions of users or anything like that. We had essentially 3 machine clusters in most of the environments, and servicing apps that were in those. The API management piece was all AWS. The identity piece was all on-prem. There were a variety of extensions into AWS and Azure. So it was essentially all on our corporate network and exposed to the internet. The apps outside were.
Okay. Did you only use one region in AWS, or did you do multiple regions?
We had multiple regions, multiple, I forget what they're called now. Availability zones, yes. There you go. Yep. None of that is relevant to this. So this is literally like pointing at one platform or cluster, grabbing the configuration and changing it to suit the environment and pushing it to another one. And it doesn't matter whether it's AWS or in on-prem. They're essentially Unix hosts either way, so Linux hosts. So. Yep. Anyone else? Thank you very much.